I want to begin with a famous text in Luke's gospel, which sometimes we don't really think about this text much. But Jesus says this. Jesus says there's more joy in heaven over one sinner that converts than over 99 righteous people who have no need of conversion. Well, you want to come to a full stop and say, whoa, does God love sinners better than righteous people? It would seem to say so. Jesus says God rejoices more over a sinner who converts than over 99 people who righteous people. So it would seem that God loves sinners more than God loves righteous people. Well, that's not what the text says. You know, this is a trick text. There are no righteous people. Okay. God loves, there's only sinners, and God loves sinners who admit that they're sinners. They're easier to love, you know. See, there's more joy in heaven over a sinner who admits that he or she is a sinner. We're all sinners, you know. There have only been two people, we believe in our Christian tradition, who have ever walked this planet who never sinned. And that was Jesus and Mary. And everybody else falls short. Remember once when I was living in Toronto, the Catholic School Board asked me if I could write a definition of what constitutes a practicing Catholic. Which is an interesting thing. Remember we used to have that? A practicing Catholic, you went to Mass and so on. So, I attempted some definition. But I said, first of all, only Jesus and Mary fit that description, okay? And the rest of us, precisely, we're still practicing, okay? You know, we're nobody. There are no whole people. There are no righteous people. You know, the most important, kind of the central part of St. Paul's teaching, okay, is the last thing he ever wrote when he was already in prison, sentenced to death and so on. He wrote the letter to the Romans, okay? And the letter to the Romans is kind of St. Paul's opus, you know. It's a dying man, disciple of Jesus, special disciple to the Gentiles. What does he want to tell us before he dies, okay? And it's really Romans chapter 1 to 8. And what Paul does in the first 7 chapters of Romans is this. He basically tells us that nobody gets it right. And nobody has ever gotten it right. He said the Jews had the law and they couldn't obey it. The Gentiles knew the law from nature in their hearts. They couldn't obey it. Nobody got it right. And then he culminates in chapter 7 and said, and nobody can get it right. And that's that famous text where Paul says, woe to me, wretch that I am. The good I want to do, I can't do. The evil I want to avoid, I end up doing. That's not a morbid text. That's a sensitive man who understands himself, or a sensitive woman. See, we're never adequate. Now, it's interesting. Paul does that for a purpose, because, of course, he's working up to chapter 8. See, so he spends 7 chapters telling us, you can't get your life right. And then he gives the thing in chapter 8, he said, because you don't have to. He said, because God is a merciful God, and there's nothing. Remember that famous text? There aren't principalities, anything that can separate you from the love of Christ, including your own weakness. See, so his final testament to the Christian community is, you can't get your life right. That's the bad news. The good news is you don't have to, you know. And he says nobody's ever got it right, but it's okay. We're people of redemption. Incidentally, that is why in Christianity and in Judaism and in Islam, the Muslims, we're the only religions that don't believe in reincarnation. Everybody else believes in reincarnation, and the reason we don't believe in it, because we all have the same God. Yahweh, Allah, it's actually the same God, okay? But our God is a God of mercy and forgiveness. You don't have to get your life right. You know, see, if you're a Hindu or a Buddhist, and those are wonderful spiritualities, but in order to go to heaven, you got to keep coming back and back till you get it right. Some of us, you know, we're on our 7th trip and so on. Okay. Remember when you were a kid at school and the teacher, you had to say, you have to keep you know, write until you can stay between the lines, and then you could pass on to the next lesson? Well, see, in every other religion, you have to get your life right. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, you don't have to get your life right. You have to try, you know. But see, that's what we're religions of redemption. You do what you can, and God does the rest. And the way God does the rest, he does it, or she, whatever God is, God does it with mercy. See, mercy fills in where we are inadequate, and we're all inadequate. Those of you who come from Protestant churches and so on, and you'll have been schooled on this, and I like this line, right back to Luther. See, classical Protestantism says, you never ask yourself, am I a sinner? You only say, what's my sin? That's true. All of us, and that's true. It's not a question, are we sinners? Are we weak? Where do we short circuit out? What are our weaknesses? There are no whole human beings. Today, we have what we call the literature of dysfunctionality. So and actually it's very good. There's a very rich literature out there about dysfunctional families, dysfunctional churches, family systems, dysfunctional organizations, dysfunctional churches, and so on. And, and it's very good literature with one exception. It seems to give the impression that somewhere there are functional families, that there are functional churches. There aren't any. It's only a question of how bad is yours and how are you coping? See, there are no whole people, there are no whole marriages, there are no perfect churches and so on. And we have good churches and good people and so on. See, we all stand in need of mercy. We don't get it right. I want to read you a famous quote from a German, she wasn't a theologian, she was a literature writer. But this is quoted in the famous Dutch Catechism. Those of you who remember back in 1966, the Dutch theologians, and these were major theologians, this was like Schillebeeckx and Schoenenberg and Piet Franston and all these famous theologians, they put out what they call a new catechism. Those of you who are my age remember when we were schooled on the Baltimore Catechism, and it was good. It taught you doctrine. Now they said, well, then we want a catechism that's existential. And so, but at one point they quote this text. This is to understand yourself. It's from Anna Blyman. She says, at a certain point in my life, I realized that it's simply impossible for a human being to be and to remain good or pure. For instance, if I wanted to be attentive in one direction, it could only be at the cost of neglecting another. If I gave my heart to one thing, I left another in the cold. No day and no hour goes by without my feeling guilty about some inadequacy. We never do enough, and what we do is never well enough done, except being inadequate, which is what we're good at. He said, because that is the way we're made. This is true of me, and it's true of everyone else. Every day and every hour brings with it its weight of moral guilt as regards my work and my relationships with others. I am constantly catching myself out in my human failings, in spite of their being implied in my human imperfections. I am conscious of a sort of check, and this means that my human shortcomings are also my human guilt. It sounds strange that we should be guilty where there's nothing we can do about it. But even where there is no purpose or deliberate intention, we have a conviction of our own shortcomings and of consequent guilt. A guilt which sometimes shows itself all too clearly in the consequences of what we have done or left undone. Now, this isn't the morbid text. This is a very sensitive human being. You'd want her for your neighbor. She's in touch with herself. There isn't any unmerited self-confidence here. She says, it's not that she's beating herself up. She said, this is St. Paul. This is Romans 7. He says, remember, Paul says, woe to me, wretched that I am. The good I want to do, I often end up not doing. The evil I want to avoid, I often end up doing. I'll just bring that out. So we stand in need of God's mercy. Back to Jesus and Luke. Jesus says there's more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who admits they're a sinner than over 99 people who think they have no need of mercy. That's what that text could be translated as.